I've been acquainted with Kevin for roughly a year now. We first crossed paths at a nearby boxing gym. While we wouldn't call each other best friends, we get along pretty well. We began training side by side, and before long, we developed a connection through our mutual enthusiasm for the sport. It was the kind of friendship that revolved around the activity itself more than anything else. But over time, we started talking beyond just gym sessions. Kevin is a chill guy, 22 years old, easygoing, and good to chat with. We don't spend time together all the time, but when we do, it's always enjoyable. Our conversations usually revolve around training, life in general, or whatever random topic comes up. I don't really know much about his family, though he has briefly mentioned his mom a few times. I never gave it much thought until one evening, after an especially grueling training session, Kevin asked me for a favor. He doesn't usually ask me for things, so I figured it wouldn't be anything big. Hey man, he started, sounding slightly unsure. Would you be able to give my mom a ride tonight? I hesitated for a moment, caught off guard by the request. Your mom? What's going on? I asked. She works over at that diner across town, he explained. It's getting late, and I was supposed to pick her up, but something came up, and I don't want her walking home by herself. I trust you, man. Do you think you could do it? I took a second to think it over. I didn't really know his mother, and I wasn't sure how she'd feel about being picked up by someone who wasn't a close friend of her son. Still, it seemed harmless enough. Plus, it wasn't a long drive, and I'd be home soon after. Yeah, sure, I finally agreed. No problem, I'll go get her. Kevin's face lit up with appreciation. Thanks, man. I owe you one. After a brief discussion about the details, what time she'd be done, and where to meet her, I agreed to be at the diner by 11 p.m., right when her shift ended. As I drove over, I found myself wondering about Kevin's mom. I hadn't really pictured her before. All I knew was that she worked at a local diner, and Kevin had mentioned her in passing, but never in depth. I wasn't expecting anything unusual, just a straightforward favor for a friend. When I arrived, the diner was nearly empty, with only a couple of cars outside. It was well past closing, and the interior lights were dimmed. I parked, shut off the engine, and waited. A few minutes later, I saw a woman emerge from the entrance. She was tall and slender, her long brown hair pulled back into a ponytail. As she approached, I recognized her even though I had never actually seen her before. I hadn't expected her to look the way she did. When she reached the car, I rolled down the window. She offered a warm smile and introduced herself. Hi, I'm Grace, she said, her tone friendly and composed. I shook her hand, slightly awkward but trying to be polite. She didn't seem to mind. Grace was striking. I wasn't sure how else to describe her. I had imagined someone who looked more like a typical 48-year-old woman, maybe showing signs of fatigue from working late nights. But no, she looked amazing for her age. If I hadn't known she was Kevin's mom, I would have guessed she was around 35, maybe 38. She got into the car, and as I started driving, we exchanged some light conversation. Any initial awkwardness quickly faded. Grace was easy to talk to, and we chatted about her job at the diner, work in general, and a little about Kevin. At first, she didn't share much about her personal life, which I figured was intentional. No reason to go into deep topics with a stranger. Then, after a short silence, she opened up. Kevin's a great kid, she said softly. Losing his father was really hard on him, on both of us. But he's managing well. I just worry about him sometimes, you know? I wasn't sure how to respond, so I simply nodded, not wanting to say the wrong thing. I could tell she was feeling emotional about it. She continued, his dad passed away in a car accident when he was little. It's been tough for him. Tough for me, too. But we're getting through it. I didn't know what to say. Losing a spouse must have been unimaginably difficult, and I could hear the weight of her words in her voice. But she seemed to be in a good place, or at least she was doing her best. We talked for a little while longer, and as we neared her house, I realized I didn't want the conversation to end. There was something about Grace. Something captivating. Her confidence, the way she carried herself. It was clear she had been through a lot, yet she radiated warmth and resilience. It was hard not to be drawn in by her presence. When I pulled up to her home, she thanked me for the ride, but not before giving me a smile that lingered just a little too long. Something about the moment felt different. I couldn't quite place it, but I knew this wasn't just a simple favor. As I drove away, my mind replayed the night. There was something about Grace that intrigued me. She wasn't just Kevin's mom. She was someone who had lived through hardship and still carried herself with an undeniable grace. I wasn't sure what, if anything, would come of it, but one thing was clear: this was more complicated than I had expected. A couple of days passed, yet the memory of that night stuck with me. It wasn't anything overly dramatic, but something about the way Grace carried herself, the ease with which she spoke and how openly she shared, had me thinking. Maybe it was just my natural curiosity, but I felt like there was more to her than what was immediately visible. Sure, she was Kevin's mother, but she was also her own person, someone with a past and experiences of her own, and I couldn't stop wondering what else she had been through. The next time I saw Kevin at the gym, we had just wrapped up a session. He was wiping the sweat off his forehead, catching his breath, while I was trying to cool down after a tough workout. "Hey man," I started casually, "your mom's cool. She's really easy to talk to." Kevin looked up, slightly surprised by the remark. "Oh yeah? You guys hit it off or something?" I let out a small chuckle, unsure how to explain. "Yeah, I mean, she's just different from what I expected." Kevin grinned, clearly happy that I didn't mind spending time with his mom. "Yeah, she's great. She doesn't usually open up to people that quickly, so I'm glad you two got along." I wasn't sure if Kevin realized just how much his mom had shared with me, how she had spoken about losing her husband and the loneliness she had endured. It was a lot for anyone to reveal, especially to someone they barely knew. But there had been something in her eyes when she talked about it, like she was still carrying the weight of the past, yet there was a small glimmer of hope, as if she was waiting for something new, something better. "I'm not saying you guys are best friends or anything, but maybe you could hang out again sometime," Kevin added, trying to sound offhanded, but failing to hide the hint of playfulness in his tone. "She liked you." I felt a knot form in my stomach at his words. I wasn't sure how to respond. I had only driven her home once, had a conversation that lasted maybe 20 minutes, and now Kevin was hinting at something more. Was he really trying to set me up with his mom? I didn't know how to process it. "I don't know, man," I replied hesitantly. "It's not like that. We just talked." Kevin just shrugged, seemingly unbothered. "I get it, but she's been through a lot. I'm just saying, you never know." As our conversation shifted back to the usual gym talk, I tried to push away the uneasy feeling that had settled in my chest. What did Kevin mean by that? Was there something I wasn't picking up on? Later that night, I decided to send Grace a text. Nothing major, just a simple message to check in and say it was nice meeting her. I didn't expect anything in return, but I figured there was no harm in being polite. To my surprise, she responded almost immediately. "It was really nice talking to you, Wilson. You're a good guy, and I'm glad Kevin has someone like you around. I don't usually open up to people, but you made it easy. Hope we can talk more soon." I reread the message a few times, taking in the weight of her words. It was a simple text, but there was a level of sincerity that I couldn't ignore. She said she didn't usually open up to people, but she had made an exception for me. Something about that felt different. Over the next few days, we exchanged texts. At first, it was just small talk, chats about work, the weather, even a little about Kevin. But gradually, the conversation shifted. Grace began sharing more about herself, her past, and the hardships she had endured. And I started to see her as more than just Kevin's mom. She was someone who had lived through a lot and still had so much to give. She wasn't the older woman I might have pictured in my head. She was strong, self-assured, and had a quiet beauty that was impossible to ignore. As the days passed, our messages became longer and more in-depth. We talked about everything: her life after Kevin's father passed away, her work at the diner, and how she was still trying to figure out what came next for her. It wasn't just casual conversation anymore. It was real, meaningful dialogue. And I started to realize I was looking forward to our chats more than I wanted to admit. One night, she sent a message that completely caught me off guard. "Wilson, I hope this isn't too forward, but I really enjoy talking to you. You make me feel like I can actually have a conversation without being judged. I know we don't know each other well, but I'd really like to get to know you more. I hope that's okay." I stared at my phone for a long time, my heart pounding. Was this what I thought it was? Was Grace interested in me? I hadn't expected this, but now that it was happening, I wasn't sure what to do. Grace's message wasn't something I could just brush aside. I had read it over and over, trying to figure out if I was reading too much into it or if she genuinely meant what she said. I hadn't been looking for anything complicated, especially not with someone like her, Kevin's mom. I knew she was a strong woman, but this was different. Was I supposed to ignore it? Or did she really want something more? The following day, I made an effort to push everything out of my mind. I went to work, stuck to my regular gym routine, and tried to stay busy. Yet, no matter how much I distracted myself, that message kept playing over and over in my head. Later that evening, I finally replied to her text. Hey Grace, it's really no trouble at all. I enjoy our conversations too. It's refreshing to talk to someone who understands. I wasn't sure if that was the right thing to say, but it was the truth. I wasn't ready to dive into anything too deep just yet, and to be honest, I didn't even know what I wanted from this. We had built a connection, sure, but that didn't mean it had to turn into anything more than just friendly conversation, right? The next few days seemed to pass in a blur. We kept texting, and it felt like we were both cautiously navigating this unspoken boundary. I was trying to figure out what this was without making things awkward for either of us, but I couldn't help thinking about her. Every conversation we had felt effortless, as if we had known each other much longer than just a few days. Still, I didn't want to rush into anything. One night, just as I was getting ready for bed, another message from her popped up. Wilson, I hope I'm not being too forward, but would you be up for grabbing a coffee sometime? Just to chat more. No worries if you're not interested, I just thought it could be nice. I put my phone down for a moment, hesitating. A part of me wondered if agreeing to meet up outside of our usual texting would be crossing a line. But then I remembered how easy it was to talk to her, how much she had shared with me in such a short time, and I realized I was genuinely curious. I typed a quick reply. Sure, coffee sounds great. When are you free? We arranged to meet that weekend, and I couldn't believe I was actually doing this. What was I thinking? I was about to have coffee with Kevin's mom. But then again, we had already talked so much that it didn't feel like a big step. It was just coffee, right? Saturday arrived, and I found myself anxiously waiting at the cafe. It was a small, cozy spot, nothing extravagant, just a quiet corner in the city. I got there early, hoping to collect my thoughts before she arrived. I wasn't nervous exactly, but I didn't want to say the wrong thing or make her uncomfortable. This wasn't a date. It was just two people who had been talking and wanted to continue getting to know each other. When Grace walked in, she looked just as composed as she always did. There was a quiet grace about her that was impossible to overlook. She smiled when she spotted me, and I stood up to greet her. Hey, Wilson, she said, her voice warm and steady. Hey, Grace, thanks for meeting up, I responded, gesturing toward the table. Please have a seat. We sat down, and at first the conversation was light. Small talk about the weather, her job, the usual things. But as we kept talking, it naturally drifted into deeper topics. She spoke about her life, the challenges she faced after Kevin's dad passed away, and how she had kept pushing forward despite it all. The more she shared, the more I found myself listening, not just to respond, but to truly understand. This wasn't just casual chatter, it was real, meaningful conversation. Grace wasn't just Kevin's mom, she was a person with her own story. And I found myself respecting her more because of it. As the cafe started to empty out, we were still deep in conversation. I glanced at my watch, surprised at how much time had passed. We had no real agenda, yet we were both enjoying the moment. At one point, Grace gave me a small smile, her expression softening. You know, she said, I don't usually do this, meet up with people I barely know, but I'm glad we did. It's been really nice having someone to talk to share things with. I haven't had that in a long time. In that moment, I felt a quiet responsibility settle over me. I wasn't just here out of politeness, I was listening because I wanted to. And for the first time in a long while, I understood what she meant. Sometimes people just need someone who will hear them out. As we finished our coffee, she seemed like she wanted to say something else but hesitated, offering a lingering smile instead. Thanks for this, Wilson. I really appreciate it, she said. Anytime, Grace, I replied, and I meant it. We said our goodbyes, and as I left the cafe, my thoughts were spinning. It had just been coffee, right? But there was something different about it. The way we talked, the way she looked at me, it felt like something had shifted. I wasn't sure where this was headed, but I knew I didn't want to stop whatever was happening between us. The days following our coffee meetup were complicated. Grace stayed on my mind in a way I couldn't ignore. There was something about her that kept drawing me in, even though I knew I should maintain some boundaries. She was Kevin's mom, after all, and no matter how well we got along, I couldn't forget that. But if I was being honest, keeping my distance wasn't as easy as it should have been. We kept texting, and her messages were just like her, warm, thoughtful, and engaging. She seemed to genuinely want to get to know me better, and I felt the same way about her. But every time I responded, there was a nagging voice in the back of my mind telling me to be careful, to remember where this could lead. This wasn't just any woman, this was someone I had built a strong connection with. But it was complicated. It wasn't supposed to happen like this. Then one evening, she sent me a message asking if I was free to talk. My heart skipped a beat when I saw her name on the screen. I quickly replied, agreeing to chat, hoping it was just another casual conversation. When I called, she answered immediately. "Hey, Wilson," she said softly. "I've been thinking about our last conversation and, well, I just wanted to make sure I'm not crossing any lines." I felt my pulse quicken. Was she regretting our coffee? Had I been too forward? No, no, Grace, I assured her. I'm really glad we talked. I think it was really nice. I quickly assured her that there was nothing to worry about. A brief silence stretched between us before she spoke again. "I just don't want to make things uncomfortable," she admitted. "I'm still trying to figure out how to move forward after everything. Losing Kevin's dad, it's been a lot to take in, you know? I understood that grief wasn't something a person could just move past overnight, but I wasn't sure where I fit into all of this. Was I simply there to listen, or was I meant to be something more?" "I get it," I said, keeping my tone steady. "But Grace, you're not alone in this. You have family, friends, and you know I'm here too, whenever you need someone to talk to." She let out a quiet sigh, almost as if my words had lifted some of the weight she was carrying. "Thanks, Wilson. I really appreciate that. Sometimes I feel like I've been so focused on taking care of everyone else that I've completely neglected myself. And honestly, I have no idea what to do with all these emotions." I could hear the raw vulnerability in her voice, and it made me want to reach out, to promise that everything would be okay. But I held back. I wasn't sure if that was what she needed from me. She had already been through so much. "You don't have to figure everything out right now," I told her. "You're doing your best, and that's enough." Another pause. Then her voice came softer this time. "I know, but I don't even know what I'm searching for, Wilson. But when we talk, I feel like there's something more. I just don't know if it's only me, or if you feel it too." I froze. Did she really just say that? Was she implying what I thought she was? I knew this wasn't supposed to happen, but something deep inside me told me it wasn't that simple. There was an undeniable connection between us, but this was Kevin's mother. "I think I feel it too," I admitted, unsure if I should be saying it at all. "But Grace, we have to be careful. I don't want to do anything that could ruin things, especially with Kevin." "I understand," she murmured, her voice barely above a whisper. "I just don't want to ignore what I'm feeling either. I know it's complicated, but we can't pretend this isn't real." Her words stirred something inside me, a flood of emotions I didn't want to acknowledge. But at the same time, I couldn't deny it anymore. There was something between us, something real, even if it felt impossible. "We'll figure it out," I said, trying to keep my composure. "But we have to be careful. We can't rush into anything. Let's just take this one step at a time, okay?" She nodded, her voice barely audible. "I can do that, one step at a time." The conversation ended soon after, but the knot in my stomach remained. We had said so much, yet so little at the same time. The air between us felt heavy, thick with things left unsaid. And no matter how much I tried to push it away, I knew this wasn't something that would simply fade. Whatever was happening between us, it wasn't going anywhere. The next day, everything felt different. There was an unspoken tension between us, even in the way we texted. It wasn't just awkwardness, it was as if we were both waiting, trying to figure out what came next. I knew Grace sensed it too. And despite everything, a part of me was excited. I had no idea where this was headed or if it was even the right thing to do, but I couldn't stop thinking about her. And maybe that was the problem. Days passed, but nothing changed. The tension between us only grew stronger. Every time her name popped up on my phone, my heartbeat quickened. We weren't constantly in touch, but when we did talk, our conversations felt different. More personal, more meaningful. One evening, she reached out again, asking if I wanted to grab dinner. It wasn't an invitation I could turn down. I told myself it was just another casual outing between friends, but deep down, I knew things were shifting, even if we hadn't said it out loud. We met at a quiet little diner on the outskirts of town. When she walked in, she looked effortlessly beautiful, her hair flowing over her shoulders, dressed simply yet elegantly. There was a softness in her expression, a glow in her eyes that I had never noticed before. But now it was impossible to miss. As she settled into her seat, I found myself blurting out, "You look nice." She laughed lightly, clearly surprised by the compliment. "Thanks. I'm just trying to do something for myself, you know?" I nodded, trying to keep things light, but beneath the surface, something was shifting. Our conversations had moved beyond casual topics like work and daily life. Now we spoke about deeper things: the past, how our experiences had shaped us, what we wanted for the future. At some point, I caught her looking at me differently. It wasn't just a fleeting glance between friends. There was something else in her eyes, something I couldn't quite put into words. My chest tightened, and I tried to push the thought away, but it stayed with me, tugging at the edges of my mind. I had been trying to maintain some distance. This wasn't supposed to happen. I wasn't supposed to feel this way about her. But sitting across from her, I couldn't lie to myself anymore. There was something between us. It had been growing ever since that night I drove her home. "So, Wilson," Grace said suddenly, breaking the silence that had settled between us, "I've been thinking maybe we've been making this more complicated than it needs to be." I raised an eyebrow. "What do you mean?" She shifted slightly, running a hand through her hair. "I mean, we keep talking about how messy this is, but maybe it doesn't have to be. Maybe we're just two people who really understand each other." I could sense the shift in the atmosphere once again. The tension was almost tangible. Was she really implying what I thought she was? "Grace, I don't want to make this awkward," I said, my voice slightly shaky. "I mean, this conversation, it's not something I ever anticipated. I never imagined I'd be in this position." She leaned in just a little, her tone softer now. "Neither did I, but sometimes things unfold in ways you don't expect, Wilson. You can't always be in control." My heart pounded, yet I still wasn't sure if I was prepared for this. This wasn't just a fleeting crush or a momentary infatuation. It was something far more intense, something that made my thoughts spin when I considered the possible outcomes. "I care about you, Gra," I finally admitted, the words slipping out before I could stop them. "I care about you more than I probably should, but I don't want to hurt you or Kevin." She held my gaze, her expression softening. "You won't hurt me. And Kevin, he just wants me to be happy. He knows how tough things have been for me." I didn't respond immediately, taking a moment to let her words sink in. They were comforting, but there was still so much to process. Grace inhaled deeply before reaching across the table, resting her hand on mine. The moment our skin touched, a wave of warmth coursed through me, but I forced myself to stay composed. "I think we're both afraid," she murmured. "But I don't want to let fear control me anymore. I'm ready to see where this leads, Wilson. Are you?" I hesitated, the weight of her question hanging between us. But then, something clicked inside me. I didn't want to turn away from this. I didn't want to look back one day and regret not taking the leap. "I'm ready," I finally said, my voice steady even as my heart raced. "I'm ready if you are." Grace's face lit up with a smile, relief shining in her eyes. There was nothing left to discuss. The choice had been made. We were stepping into something new, something real. For the first time in what felt like forever, I wasn't just moving through life, I was truly living. After dinner, we stepped outside together, the crisp night air refreshing against my skin. As we stood by her car, she wrapped her arms around me in a tight embrace. It wasn't just a friendly hug, it meant something more, something I couldn't quite define but deeply felt. "I'm so glad you're here," she whispered near my ear. In that instant, I knew. We were at the start of something beautiful. I didn't know what the future held or how things would play out, but one thing was certain. We were ready to discover it together. It's strange how life works sometimes. One moment, you're caught in a storm of uncertainty, unsure of what's ahead. Then suddenly, you find yourself in a place you never expected, where everything just feels right. That was exactly how I felt sitting across from Grace on a quiet Sunday afternoon. Sunlight streamed through the window, casting a golden glow over the room. We were at her apartment, the same one she'd lived in for years. But today, it felt different. It felt like home. Everything between us had settled into something natural. The awkwardness that had once clouded our conversations had disappeared, replaced by something solid. something I couldn't have foreseen just months ago. Now, we weren't just discussing the present, we were talking about the future, and it felt right. Grace said, leaning back against the couch, I never saw this coming. I didn't expect any of it. I smiled, my heart full. Neither did I admitted softly. But sometimes you don't see what's right in front of you until it's almost too late. She met my eyes, and for a brief moment, we simply sat there, both of us silently acknowledging the journey that had brought us here. I'm glad we didn't let fear stop us, she said, her voice barely above a whisper. I've been afraid of starting over, of opening up again. But with you, it's different. I could see the honesty in her gaze, and I knew exactly what she meant. I had been scared too. But with Grace, everything seemed simpler. In her presence, I had found myself again. For the first time in ages, I felt truly seen, truly understood. I'm glad too, I replied, reaching out to take her hand. I think we make a great team, Grace. It already feels like we've been through so much together, and it hasn't even been that long. She gently squeezed my hand, her eyes softening. Yeah, it feels like we've known each other forever. A quiet moment passed between us, but it wasn't awkward. It was peaceful. It was as if we both understood that this was exactly where we were meant to be. No doubts. No hesitation. I never thought any of this would happen, I admitted, leaning in just slightly. That night when I drove you home for Kevin, I thought I was just doing him a favor. I had no idea it would lead to this. Grace let out a small, amused chuckle, a soft smile playing on her lips. Neither did I, she said. But I guess some things happen for a reason. She was right. What started as something simple had transformed into something far more meaningful. It was no longer just about physical attraction. It was about companionship, trust, and truly understanding one another. It was about knowing we were both finally at a place where we could share our lives with someone who genuinely saw us for who we were. I'm glad everything happened this way, I said, my tone firm and certain. And I'm really glad it's you. Grace's smile grew wider as she leaned in, pressing a soft, gentle kiss to my lips. When we pulled apart, I saw the same warmth in her gaze that I had felt growing between us over the past few months. I'm glad it's you too, she murmured so quietly it was barely audible. We stayed there a little longer, simply talking, enjoying the comfort of being together. We spoke about our dreams for the future, how we had each gone through our own struggles. But now we could finally look forward, knowing we were creating something meaningful. What we had was already strong, and I knew it would only continue to grow. There was no more doubt, no more questioning if we were making the right choice. We had already taken that leap, and we had landed on solid ground together. Whatever came next, we were ready. Just then, the doorbell rang, and Grace's expression brightened. It was Kevin, back from spending the weekend at his dad's house. He stepped inside, flashing a big grin, clearly happy to see us both. Hey, you two, he said, nodding as he walked in. How's everything? I returned his smile. Everything's good, Kevin. Everything's really great. Grace glanced between him and me, her face full of contentment. Yeah, she agreed. Everything's great. And in that moment, I had a realization. I had found the love I never even knew I had been searching for. Grace and I had come so far from that first car ride, and now we were building something real. I couldn't have asked for anything better. What had started as a simple favor had turned into something much deeper. Now, we were a team, two people who had found each other exactly when we needed to. Whatever challenges life had in store, we would face them together. And that was the only thing that truly mattered.